There's this distinct feeling you get when you go back to your hometown after, say, a decade away. You're driving down the main street and you expect to see the old movie theater or that diner you used to hang out in.
It's not there.
It's not there. It's a block of condos or maybe just an empty lot. There's this dislocation. The map you have in your head, it just doesn't match the territory anymore.
You're navigating by memory, but the roads themselves have physically changed.
Exactly. And I think that's the perfect headspace for what we're covering today, because the stack of documents, articles, and analysis we're diving into, and we're primarily looking at work by analysts like Diesen and Einar, Tangen, is essentially arguing that the Western world,
Specifically, the leadership in the U.S. and Europe.
right, they're driving down a road that just doesn't exist anymore.
And, the more lost they get, the harder they seem to be pressing the gas pedal.
We are talking about the end of what's been called the unipolar moment. And look, I know a term like geopolitics can sound a bit dry, a bit academic.
Oh, yeah. It can put people to sleep.
But this isn't about, trade tariffs or the subsections of some obscure treaty. This is about a fundamental rupture in how the world actually works.
A vibe shift, as the kids say, but for global power.
A vibe shift for global power. I like that. The central metaphor our sources kept coming back to is from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus. You cannot swim in the same river twice.
Because it's not the same river, and you're not the same person. It sounds poetic, but in this context, it's a very stark warning. The river is the global distribution of power.
It flows. It changes course.
It's supposed to. But the argument here, the one we're really digging into, is that the U.S. is essentially standing on the riverbank, just screaming at the water to flow back upstream.
Back to where it was in, 1995?
Exactly. Back to the 1990s, the era of the end of history. The Soviet Union was gone. America was the undisputed sole superpower. And it really felt like the whole world was just going to become a franchise of Western liberal democracy.
That was the unipolar world. One pole. One single center of gravity, and it was located in Washington, D.C.
But the core thesis of this deep dive, based on these sources, is that the river has moved on. We are now, for better or worse, in a multipolar world. You have China, you have India, Russia, Brazil, the entire global south finding its footing. Power is distributed.
And the really scary part, the part that frankly kept me up reading this stuff, is the reaction to that shift.
It's not an acceptance.
It is the opposite of acceptance.
Yeah.
The sources are arguing that the U.S. isn't just ignoring this change. It is, for all intents and purposes, declaring war on the very idea of multipolarity. The thesis is that we are moving from a global policeman model,
where, at least there was a pretense of rules and laws.
yes, a pretense of order. We're moving from that to what the analysts are calling the rule of the jungle. Just naked aggression aimed at restoring dominance.
And that shift, it's not abstract. It impacts everything. It's why, according to this analysis, Europe's economy is completely flatlining. It explains the strange, almost hysterical rhetoric we're hearing from politicians. It explains why all the rules of international relations seem to be breaking down.
So today, we're going to unpack that. We'll look at the new American strategy, what the sources call Europe's existential crisis, the deep internal chaos in U.S. politics, and then the rise of this alternative system being built in the East.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. So let's buckle up. We're going to start with what the analysts are calling the mask comes off. And this moment, this turning point, centers on a specific event that might have flown under the radar for a lot of people, the Munich Security Conference.
Right. Munich is usually a very, very scripted affair. You know the drill. Lots of polite clapping, lots of talk about shared values and transatlantic bonds. It's very predictable.
But this time, Senator Marco Rubio took the stage. And according to our sources, especially the detailed analysis from Einar Tangen, what Rubio said signaled a massive tectonic pivot in U.S. strategy.
It wasn't just another speech.
Not at all. But hold on. Before we even get into the speech itself, we need the context. Because just before this, Rubio had done an interview, I think it was with Megyn Kelly, where he sounded completely different.
He really did. In that interview, he came across as almost pragmatic, a realist. He openly admitted that the U.S. isn't the only superpower anymore. He said, and this is almost a direct quote, that the U.S. would have to adjust to a world with other great powers.
Which, if you heard that, you'd think, okay, finally, an adult in the room. You'd think he's preparing the ground for some kind of settlement, a grand bargain.
You'd think he's acknowledging reality, that if you can't run the whole show by yourself anymore, you have to negotiate your slice of the pie. It's just common sense.
But then he gets to Munich. He stands up in front of all the European leaders, the entire transatlantic security establishment, and the script completely flips. 180 degrees. What did he say?
He stopped talking about adjustment. He stopped talking about balance. He gave a speech that our sources describe as essentially a call to restore empire.
Restore empire. Those are strong words.
They are, and I want to be very precise about the language he used because it matters so much.
Right.
He explicitly referenced 5 centuries of glorious Western empires.
Glorious.
Yeah.
That's a loaded word,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about the history of colonialism.
It's an incredibly loaded word. He drew a direct, unbroken line from the European colonial powers of the 16th century all the way to modern American hegemony. And then, and this is the absolute kicker, he blamed the decline of the West not on bad economic policies, not on military overreach, not on internal decay.
But on what?
He blamed it on the anti-colonial uprisings of the 20th century.
Wait, let me just pause there. Let me make sure I'm hearing this right. He is standing in Europe in the 21st century and effectively saying the big mistake we all made was letting the colonies go independent.
That is precisely the interpretation that our sources are highlighting. He framed the last 80 years not as a victory for freedom or national self-determination, but as a tragic loss of control, a mistake.
Wow.
So the message to the Europeans in that room, the subtext wasn't, let's work together to defend democracy. It was, you guys used to run the world, then we took over and ran the world. We've lost control. Join us, and we can force the world to obey us again.
That feels desperate and incredibly aggressive. It's no longer join our club because our values are better. It's join our gang because we're going to beat up anyone who isn't in it.
It's a straight-up ultimatum. Help us restore dominance, or we will go it alone, and you'll be left behind. And this is the moment where that rule of the jungle concept really clicks into place. The analysts argued this speech signals the definitive end of benign hegemony.
The idea that America's power was good for everyone.
Right. That's over. The U.S. is no longer pretending to be the global policeman who keeps everyone safe and upholds the law. It is signaling quite openly that it is out for itself, and if that means smashing the global order to pieces, then so be it.
And Rubio isn't just, riffing off the cuff here. This isn't just one senator's opinion. There's a whole intellectual architecture being built behind this. The sources point to one person in particular, a guy named Eldridge Colby.
Yeah.
I've seen his name pop up in think tank circles, but for the listener who doesn't follow the inside baseball of the Pentagon, who is Eldridge Colby?
Eldridge Colby is identified by our sources as the intellectual architect of this new strategy. Think of him as the brain behind the new American Century 2.0, but his worldview is, well, it's very specific and very stark.
How so?
He views the world strictly as a risk board, a Game of Thrones. For him, the globe is just territory to be divided up or dominated. There's no talk of values, no talk of international law. It's pure, unadulterated power politics.
So how does Colby see the map? Who are the pieces on the board?
He sees China as the target. The one and only target. Everything else, literally everything, is secondary and judged by its utility in the conflict with China.
What about Europe? A key ally, right?
Not to Colby, according to these sources. He reportedly views Europe as broken and no longer useful.
Ouch.
Except as a pawn. A piece you can sacrifice to gain an advantage against China. The Middle East. It's just a gas station that we need to control to keep oil prices where we want them. It's that cynical.
It strips away all the moral language, all the talk of spreading democracy that we heard for decades.
It's all gone. It's just about power. And this is why the sources are so adamant that the U.S. is declaring war on multipolarity itself. Colby and Rubio and this whole school of thought, they aren't interested in a world where Brazil or India or South Africa have an equal say at the table. They want to return to a clear hierarchy, with America at the top.
So let's play this out. Let's step outside the Western bubble for a second. If I'm sitting in the global South, let's say I'm a diplomat in Indonesia or a business leader in Nigeria, and I hear a prominent U.S. senator talking about the glory of empire, how am I supposed to react to that?
You are horrified. Absolutely horrified. The sources estimate that about 85% of the world population, the part we call the global South, views this kind of rhetoric with total and utter disgust.
Because for them, the empire wasn't glorious.
Not even close. It was extraction. It was subjugation. It was violence. It was having your resources stripped and your culture suppressed. So when the West starts saying, let's go back to the good old days, the rest of the world immediately says, whoa, 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 those were your good old days, not ours.
It creates this massive, unbridgeable disconnect. The West is feeling nostalgic for a past it idealizes?
And the rest of the world is still dealing with the trauma from that same past.
Exactly.
And this disconnect is what makes the whole strategy so incredibly dangerous and self-defeating.
How so?
Because you cannot build a global coalition on the promise of restoring colonialism. It's a non-starter. All it does is push the entire global South away, and it pushes them right into the arms of the alternative systems, the alternative powers that we're going to talk about later.
It's like you're trying to recruit for your team by telling everyone how great it was when you used to bully them.
It's a terrible sales pitch.
It really is. But before we get to that alternative, we have to talk about the people who are caught right in the middle of this. The ones being asked to join the gang. The henchmen, as one of the sources bleakly calls them. Which brings us to Section 2, Europe's existential crisis.
This, for me, was maybe the bleakest part of the entire reading. The way the analysts describe modern Europe is just as a continent that is completely lost, adrift.
There was a phrase they used that really stuck with me. They said Europe is half pregnant.
Right. Which, biologically is completely impossible. You either are or you aren't. There's no in between.
But geopolitically, what does that mean?
Geopolitically, Europe is trying to be both. On one hand, they see the writing on the wall. They realize the U.S. is becoming an unreliable, even erratic partner. They see the chaos in American politics. They hear the America First rhetoric. They worry about a second Trump term.
So logically, they know they should be building their own strength.
They know they should be diversifying. They should be building strong trade relationships with China. They should be keeping energy lines open with Russia. They should be building their own strategic autonomy.
But they can't bring themselves to do it.
They are completely paralyzed. They're clinging to the U.S. alliance, even as the U.S. is explicitly telling them, we don't really care about your economic survival. We care about our fight with China. The sources describe Europe's status as having been downgraded. They're not a junior partner anymore, sitting at the table.
They're a pawn.
They're a pawn. A piece on the board that gets sacrificed to save the king. And in this analogy, the king is in Washington.
And sacrifice here isn't just a metaphor. We need to talk about the actual numbers because the economic reality for Europe right now is just brutal.
It is staggering. I mean, just look at the growth projections. For 2024, the entire Eurozone is hoping for maybe 1% growth, if they're lucky.
1%. That's basically stagnation.
It is. For 2025, the best estimate is 1.4%. Now compare that to the US, which is growing at more than double that rate, and then compare it to China, which is growing at 4 to 5 times that rate. Europe is being left in the dust. It's becoming, as one analyst put it, an open-air museum, beautiful to visit, but not where the future is being built.
And the root cause isn't just, European laziness or too much regulation, which is the old stereotype. A huge piece of it is energy, right? You simply cannot run a modern industrial economy without affordable energy.
Exactly. Energy is the absolute lifeblood of industry. And right now, European industries are paying roughly 3 times more for their energy than their competitors in the United States.
3 times.
And that's compared to the U.S. Compared to China, it's even worse. Energy in China is significantly cheaper, something like 25–30% cheaper.
So let's make that real. If I'm a German manufacturer, let's say I make chemicals or auto parts, something energy intensive, how on earth am I supposed to compete globally? My competitor in Ohio has an energy bill that's a third of mine. My competitor in Shenzhen pays a fraction of what I do.
The simple answer is you don't compete, you close your factory. You move it. You deindustrialize. And we're seeing that happen in real time. Major European chemical companies, manufacturing giants, they are shutting down factories in Germany and moving them to the US or to China. It is a hollowing out of the European economic core.
And this is where it just becomes maddening. This is the part I can't wrap my head around. The self-sabotage, as the sources call it. Because there is a potential solution to this energy crisis, right? Green technology, solar panels, electric vehicles.
A solution that China happens to be the world's leading producer of. They make high-quality solar panels and EVs cheaply and at a massive scale.
So you have a crisis, and here's the solution on a silver platter. But what is Europe doing?
They are slapping tariffs on cheap Chinese solar panels or launching investigations into Chinese EVs, threatening more tariffs.
This just drives me crazy. It makes no sense. You are in an energy crisis. Someone offers you the technology to solve it, and it's cheap, and you say no thank you and block it.
Because they're being forced to prioritize the geopolitical alliance with the U.S. over their own economic logic and the well-being of their own citizens, they are blocking the obvious solution because Washington has decided that containing China is the #1 priority for everyone.
So they're choosing loyalty to Washington over energy security for their own people. Why? I mean, I understand alliances, but this feels like a form of collective suicide. Why would a French or German leader knowingly implement policies that hurt their own population so directly?
And that question brings us to a very controversial but very central theory in the source material we looked at, the idea of elite capture.
Okay, let's unpack this one carefully, because the sources brought up the Epstein files. And when you hear that, your mind usually goes to the scandal, the horrific crimes. But the analysts here are using it as a symbol for something much more structural, right?
Exactly. They're not focused on the tabloid aspect of it, as grim as that is. They're using the Epstein network as a case study, a symbol of a broader web of compromise that exists at the highest levels of Western society.
A web that involves more than just sordid behavior.
Much more. The source explicitly mentions that this web involved intelligence services and top-tier elites from multiple nations. They referenced figures like Noam Chomsky and leading physicists who were, in that orbit. The point isn't about any one individual, it's about the creation of leverage.
Compromise.
Blackmail, essentially. Or at least the potential for it.
Precisely. The theory of elite capture is that a significant portion of the European and broader Western elite class is captured. They are compromised either through these kinds of networks or through financial ties to U.S. interests or through other forms of leverage to the point where they are no longer free agents acting in their own nation's best interests.
They're acting in the interests of this transatlantic elite network.
Yes. They prioritize the agenda of that network over the needs of their own citizens. So when a European leader makes a decision to cut off cheap Russian gas or to ban cheap Chinese solar panels, the argument is they aren't doing it because they genuinely believe it's good for the German working class.
They're doing it because they're playing their assigned role in the system. The source used the word henchman. Europe is being offered the role of henchman to the American empire. And because of this dynamic of elite capture, the theory goes, their leaders accept that role, even as their own country's standard of living collapses.
That is an incredibly bleak picture for the future of Europe. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, and their own leaders are helping to push the rock. But let's look at the boss in this relationship for a minute. If Europe is betting its entire future on the United States, they might want to take a closer look at who is actually driving the car over there. Which brings us to Section 3, the internal chaos in the U.S.
This is where the analysis really drills down into the fractures within American politics. And the key argument from the source is that we make a huge mistake when we think of, say, the Republican Party as one single monolithic entity.
It's not one big happy family.
Not even close. They argue that there are two distinct and, as they put it, pernicious factions that are driving this new aggressive foreign policy. And they don't agree on much, but they agree on being aggressive.
So it's not just Republicans versus Democrats anymore. It's tribes within tribes. Let's meet them. Who is Group 1?
Group 1 is what the source calls the blood and soil nativists. This is the faction that Marco Rubio's speech in Munich perfectly represents. The ideology here is entirely backward-looking. It's driven by a desire to return to an imagined, idealized past.
A past where America and Europe were white, Christian bastions.
Exactly. The source highlighted Rubio's specific emphasis on the Christian roots of Europe and America as a unifying call to arms. It's a cultural restoration project. The rhetoric is all about blaming immigrants, blaming Muslims, blaming secularism for society's problems. It's about closing the borders, looking inward, and reasserting a very specific traditional cultural identity. You could call it the Make America 1950 Again wing.
Okay, so that's Group 1, traditionalist, nationalist, nativist. Who is Group 2? They seem very different.
Very different. Group 2 is what the source labels the tech oligarchs or the privatizers. The key figures to think about here are people like Peter Thiel, his company Palantir, and politicians like J.D. Vance.
This is the Silicon Valley wing, but not the, yoga and organic smoothie side of Silicon Valley.
No, this is the dark side of the force. This is the Palantir wing. Surveillance technology, data analytics, defense contracting. Their ideology is fundamentally different from the nativists. They don't want to restore the past. They believe that society, and especially democracy, is broken.
That the system is too slow, too inefficient, too stupid to survive in the modern world.
Precisely. They think democracy is an obsolete operating system. So what's their solution?
Technocracy.
Technocracy. Privatize the government. They believe that a small cadre of tech titans like themselves are simply smarter than everyone else and should be allowed to run the world unconstrained by voters or constitutions. The source suggests that someone like J.D. Vance acts as a bridge here. He's backed by these powerful tech interests specifically to go to Washington and disrupt the current order.
It's like a cyberpunk dystopia. You have the nativists who want to launch a religious crusade, and you have the tech oligarchs who want to replace the government with a corporate board of directors.
And what's the common thread? What did they both agree on?
They both want to dismantle the current status quo. They both see the existing system as the enemy. They just want to tear it down for completely different reasons.
And just to round out the picture, the source briefly described the other side, the corporate Democrats, as basically being rentiers.
Rent seekers.
Right. Their goal is to dominate global markets through the control of intellectual property, pharmaceutical patents, software rights, copyright. They don't want to build things. They want to own the licenses for things and extract rent from the rest of the world.
So you've got three different factions fighting for the steering wheel of the country, and none of them seem particularly interested in global stability or international law.
Not in the slightest.
Yeah.
And the source threw in one more unsettling detail, a mention of federal goon squads, specifically referencing IC, the immigration agency.
Yes, that was a striking image in the transcript. The analyst Einar Tangen spoke about this growing fear of internal chaos within the U.S. itself. He described masked federal agents. His words were, federal goon squads, roaming the streets of American cities, bypassing constitutional rights. It paints a very vivid picture of growing domestic instability.
And if you are Europe and you're watching all of this unfold, the factional warfare, the internal strife, the breakdown of norms, you absolutely have to ask yourself, is this the partner we want to be completely dependent on for our survival?
It's the very definition of an unreliable partner. The U.S. is tearing itself apart internally while demanding absolute, unquestioning loyalty externally. It's a dangerous combination.
It's a house of cards.
So if the U.S. is chaotic and aggressive and Europe is paralyzed and captured, is there any alternative on the board? This takes us to Section 4 and a look at the other side, China and the concept of multipolarity.
And the first thing we have to do here is redefine multipolarity, because the expert makes a really crucial point early on. Multipolarity is a fact, not a policy.
What does that distinction mean? That sounds a little abstract.
It means you don't get to choose whether the world is multipolar or unipolar. It's not a preference like vanilla or chocolate. It's a measurement of physics. It's a description of reality.
It's about the distribution of mass.
Exactly. Do you have the economic mass? Do you have the military power, the population, the technological base? The simple, measurable fact is that the West no longer holds the overwhelming concentration of power that it did in the 1990s. That's just reality. You can't pass a law to legislate against gravity.
So given that reality, the West has two options. Option A is denial.
Which is the Rubio-Colby plan. Try to restore the 90s. But since you don't actually have the overwhelming power to do that peacefully anymore, you have to resort to force. You have to be willing to burn down the institutions like the UN or the WTO that get in your way. You have to risk war. You have to actively destroy your competitors to regain your spot at the top.
And what's option B?
Acceptance. Adjust to the new reality. Find a settlement. Negotiate a grand bargain where everyone has a seat at the table.
Now, China, for its part, has put forward its own framework for what this new world could look like. They have these 4 pillars. It sounds like a lot of, bureaucratic buzzwords, global security initiative, global development initiative, civilization, governance.
It does sound like jargon, but if you dig into it, there's a core philosophy underneath all of that. And that philosophy can be summed up in one word: sovereignty.
The right of each nation to run itself without outside interference.
That is the absolute key. The Chinese argument, which resonates deeply across the global south, is this: we do not have to agree on ideology. I don't have to like how you run your country, and you don't have to like how I run mine. We can have different political systems, different values, but we can still trade. We can coexist.
It's a fundamentally transactional relationship.
It is, but it's not just about money. There's a crucial security component. The Global Security Initiative is built on a concept they call indivisible security.
Security is indivisible. Unpack that for us.
It means that I cannot truly be safe if my neighbor feels unsafe. It's a simple idea. If I put a bunch of cannons on my front porch and point them at your house, I might feel safer for a minute, but you feel threatened. So you go out and buy a bigger cannon and point it back at me. Pretty soon, the whole neighborhood blows up.
True security requires my neighbor to also feel secure.
Exactly. It's a rejection of the zero-sum game. This feels very, very different from the traditional NATO approach, which for decades has been about expansion. We expand, you retreat, we gain security at your expense.
The Western model has been, we are secure when we dominate you.
Right, and the Chinese model, at least the one they're proposing, is we are secure when we are both stable. You can see why the Global South, which has been on the receiving end of domination for centuries, finds that second option much more appealing.
And speaking of options, there was a really monumental idea thrown out in this source material, a kind of wild what-if scenario for Europe.
Oh yeah, the join BRICS idea.
It sounds completely insane when you first hear it, doesn't it? The idea of Germany or France or Italy joining BRICS, the bloc led by China and Russia.
It sounds wild because our brains are so hardwired into the current Cold War-style alignment. But the source argues that if Europe was truly serious about saving its economy and regaining its sovereignty, making a move to join BRICS would be the ultimate out-of-the-box solution.
It would be the most dramatic signal possible that they are breaking from U.S. dependence.
It would be a declaration of strategic autonomy. It would be them saying, we are a Eurasian power. We are ready to work with the Global South on their terms, not just as America's henchmen. Now, would it happen? Probably not. Washington would be absolutely apoplectic. It would probably cause the biggest crisis in the Western alliance ever.
But it highlights that there are other paths. There are options on the table. If Europe only had the political will and courage to even consider them.
The menu is bigger than they pretend it is.
Exactly. Okay, before we wrap this up, we have to touch on the final section from our research. Because we've talked a lot about Europe, but there's another major U.S. ally that mirrors Europe's situation almost perfectly. Japan.
Japan is the perfect Asian parallel to Europe in this entire analysis. They are caught in the exact same trap, facing the same impossible choices.
They're trying to revive their economy with this weird mix of policies, Abenomics, Trump-style protectionism, Reaganomics, that the source says are fundamentally contradictory.
They don't work together. The source mentioned the specific problem of trying to raise wages while also deliberately weakening your currency, the yen.
Right. You raise wages to try and help people, give them more buying power, but if your currency is weak, the cost of everything you import goes through the roof.
Yeah.
And Japan, just like Europe, has to import almost everything.
Energy, food, raw materials. So a weak yen just destroys their purchasing power and creates inflation. It cancels out the wage gains they're running in place.
And geopolitically, they're making the exact same moves as Europe.
The exact same. They're systematically alienating their most important neighbors. Japan is taking a very hard line on Taiwan. It's remilitarizing. It's creating friction with both China and Russia. But who do they desperately need for affordable energy and food security?
Russia and China.
It's the grocery store problem all over again. You're trying to pick a fight with the only grocery store in town. It's economic suicide.
And the source pointed out there's already a solution sitting right there, a trilateral solution.
Yes. There's an existing economic framework between South Korea, Japan, and China. The source suggests the only logical path for Japan is to ignore the political friction Washington is stirring up and just double down on that group, plus Russia for trade and development. Focus on the economics. But again, geopolitics keeps getting in the way.
And this all leads to my absolute favorite metaphor from the entire deep dive. The analysts accuse Western leaders of cosplaying World War II.
It is such a powerful and damning image. Cosplay. You know, it's dressing up as a character from a movie or a comic book. It's make-believe.
And the argument is that Western leaders in both Europe and the U.S. are pretending that they are Churchill or FDR. They are viewing every current conflict through the distorted lens of 1939.
Every adversary is Hitler. Every situation is Munich. Hitler must be defeated.
And if you genuinely believe you are fighting Hitler, then compromise becomes impossible. It becomes immoral. You can't negotiate with pure evil.
Exactly. It locks you into a mindset of total war, victory at any cost. But the source argues this is a completely false and dangerous analogy. This isn't World War II. Russia is not Nazi Germany. China is not Imperial Japan. The world today is deeply, deeply interconnected economically. You can't just declare total war and destroy your rival without completely destroying your own economy in the process.
And at the same time, the U.S. is also trying to sell a different historical cosplay, Cold War 2.0, the great struggle of democracy versus authoritarianism.
But that doesn't fit the reality either. During the first Cold War, the Soviet bloc and the Western bloc barely traded with each other. It was two separate economic systems. Today, everyone trades with everyone. China is the largest trading partner for most of the world, including most of America's allies. You can't just draw a new iron curtain across the global supply chain without triggering a worldwide depression.
And the Global South isn't buying the good versus evil narrative anyway. There was a great line in the source about the deep irony of colonialism, how Europeans are now publicly complaining about being colonized economically by China.
The irony is just so thick you could cut it with a knife. You hear European officials complain that China is flooding their markets with cheap cars or that they're buying up ports and infrastructure. And the entire global south is sitting there listening and saying, "Oh, really? It's annoying when a powerful foreign country comes in and starts to dominate your economy. Please tell us more about how that feels. We're taking notes."
It's very hard to get sympathy for that particular grievance when your continent basically invented the game.
Precisely. You don't get to complain about the rules you wrote.
So let's bring all of this home. We're in the outro now. We've looked at the aggressive new U.S. rhetoric, the deep paralysis of Europe, the chaotic fashions inside the U.S., and the simple reality of a rising multipolar world. What does this all mean for us, for you listening right now?
I think the main synthesis is that we are living in an incredibly dangerous transition period. That's the key takeaway. The old world of American unipolarity is dead. It's over. The river has moved on. But the West refuses to let the new world of multipolarity be born, and we are living in the friction, in the grinding of the gears between those two realities.
The source did mention one potential glimmer of hope, or at least a reality check, and it came from a surprising place, the American people. They called it the Apprentice Season 2 idea.
Right. The idea is that if Trump returns to office, Apprentice Season 2, it might bring a lot of chaos and inflammatory rhetoric. But ultimately, the source argues that the American people, at the end of the day, vote with their pocketbooks. If this aggressive restore the empire foreign policy leads to higher inflation, to broken supply chains, to endless wars and economic ruin, the voters will eventually reject it. Reality has a way of asserting itself at the ballot box.
And there's a cultural shift happening, too, underneath the political noise. The source mentioned the Little Red Book phenomenon. And they don't mean Mao's book.
No, they mean the app Xiaohongshu. It's basically the Chinese version of Instagram or Yelp, hugely popular for travel and lifestyle content. The point the source was making is that a new generation of Western travelers are going to China, using these apps, and seeing the reality on the ground for themselves.
They see the high-speed trains that actually work. They see the clean, safe streets. They see normal people living modern, comfortable lives.
It completely breaks the narrative. It shatters the Mordor image that's pushed in our media. It's much harder to dehumanize an enemy when you're watching their travel vlogs or seeing that they have better public infrastructure than you do. It makes that good versus evil spell much, much harder to cast.
So, as we always do, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Yeah.
And this one, when I read it in the source notes, it really gave me chills.
It is a genuinely chilling question. The source poses it like this. If the West, as a civilization, believes that for its values to survive, it must dominate the world.
But the reality is that it can no longer dominate the world.
Yeah.
Then what happens? What choice does it make?
Does the West choose to gracefully adjust, to share power, to find a new role in a multipolar world? Or does it choose to destroy the entire global order rather than let someone else have a turn at the top?
Are we witnessing the management of decline turning into a suicide pact?
That is the unbelievably heavy question that we all have to sit with. Are we, as a society, willing to burn down the entire village just because we're no longer the mayor?
A heavy thought to end on, but one we need to keep in mind as we watch the news this week. We've unpacked a huge amount today. Rubio's speech, Europe's crisis, the rule of the jungle, the unstoppable river. As always, our goal isn't to tell you what to think, but to show you the powerful currents that are moving just beneath the surface.
Keep your eyes on that river, because it's moving very, very fast.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.